This little girl reveals location of millionaire's daughters, but when they enter the location, they discover something shocking. Comment letting me know what city you're watching from. I really want to know where you're at, and subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The icy wind of May swept across the Jersey shore when Richard Sterling felt his life shatter again. 3 years ago, his twin daughters, Sky and Summer, simply vanished during a trip to the boardwalk, leaving a void that not even the success of his yacht equipment company could fill. That late afternoon at 52, he walked alone along the beach, trying to escape the office where every signed document reminded him of a routine that had lost all meaning. That's when a fragile little voice stopped him. "Mister, your daughters are over there." Richard turned and saw a 4-year-old girl, too thin for her age, with dirty clothes and large eyes that shone with tears. Her light brown hair was disheveled, and she pointed with small fingers to a dilapidated house across the street, an abandoned building he knew well. It had been deteriorating for decades. Richard's heart pounded violently. "What did you say?" "Your daughters, Sky and Summer. They're waiting for you," the girl repeated, her voice trembling. "They told me their daddy is tall, has dark hair, and works with boats. That's you, isn't it?" Richard's legs faltered. No one could know those specific details. No one except, "Who are you? How do you know my daughters' names?" "I'm Iris," she replied, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "And I know because they told me. Come with me, please." Before Richard could fully process what was happening, Iris had already started walking towards the ruined house. He followed her, his heart beating so hard he could hear his own pulse in his ears. Each step seemed like an eternity, each second a torture between hope and despair. The house was on a side street, surrounded by vegetation that had grown wild over the years. The windows were broken, the paint peeling off the walls, and the roof had several shingles missing. Iris stopped in front of the rusty gate and looked at him with an expression strangely mature for her age. "They were here yesterday," she said, "but today they went somewhere else." Richard felt like he had been punched in the stomach. Somewhere else? What's somewhere else? Iris didn't answer immediately. Instead, she sat on the curb and began to draw in the sand with a stick. Richard watched, hypnotized, as she created 2 small figures holding hands. "Iris, where do you live? Where's your family?" "I live with Grandma Patty over there." She pointed to a makeshift tent made of tarps and pieces of wood, set up under a nearby bridge. "She's taken care of me since I was born." At that moment, an elderly woman approached, carrying a large bag full of cans and cardboard. Patty was 67 years old, with completely white hair tied in a messy bun and clothes that had seen better days. Her eyes, however, were bright and intelligent. "Iris, how many times have I told you not to bother people?" Patty said, but without harshness in her voice. She looked at Richard with curiosity. "Sorry, mister. She's a good girl, but sometimes she says strange things." "Strange like?" asked Richard, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. Patty sighed. "Since she was little, she's talked about children that no one else sees. Says they talk to her, tell her stories. The doctors at the clinic say it's normal in children who have experienced trauma." "What kind of trauma?" The old woman hesitated, looking at Iris, who continued to draw in the sand. "Her mother passed away when Iris was born. Complications during childbirth. Since then, I've taken care of her alone. Sometimes I think the girl creates these stories to deal with loneliness." Richard crouched down beside Iris. "The girls you see, do they look like the ones you drew?" Iris stopped drawing and looked him directly in the eyes. "They're exactly alike, like they're the same person divided in 2. And they always talk about the daddy who works with boats and the mommy who cries every night." The world seemed to stop around Richard. Margaret, his wife, really cried every night since the twins disappeared. How could this child know that? "Iris," he said gently, "can you take me to where you saw these girls for the last time?" The girl nodded and stood up, shaking the sand off her clothes. "But it has to be tomorrow. Now they're sleeping." Richard looked at Patty, who watched the interaction with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "Mrs. Patty, can I come back tomorrow to talk more with Iris?" "Sure," replied the elderly woman, "but don't get too carried away with her stories. We've had problems before with people who believed and were disappointed." As he walked back home, Richard felt a confusing mix of emotions. Part of him knew it was impossible, that Iris was probably just a child with psychological problems creating fantasies. But another part, the desperate part that had been searching for sky and summer for 3 years, clung to every word of the girl, as if it were a lifeline. When he got home, he found Margaret sitting in the kitchen, looking at 2 cups of hot chocolate that she had prepared automatically, a habit she had maintained since the girl's disappearance, as if they would return at any moment for an afternoon snack. "You're late," she said without looking up. Margaret was 48 years old, but seemed to have aged a decade in the last 3 years. Her blonde hair was always tied up carelessly, and she had lost too much weight, leaving her looking fragile. "Margaret, I need to tell you something strange that happened today." She finally looked up, and Richard saw in her eyes the same mixture of hope and fear that he felt. "What is it?" Richard told her about the encounter with Iris, watching his wife's expressions change from disbelief to anger, then to something that looked like renewed despair. "Richard, we can't go through this again," she said, her voice trembling. "How many times have we followed false leads? How many times have our hearts been shattered by empty hopes? I know, but there's something different about this girl. She knew things that anyone in the city could know," interrupted Margaret, rising abruptly from the chair. "Everyone knows our story. Everyone knows we have missing twin daughters. It's no mystery that I cry, Richard." They argued late into the night, Margaret begging him not to get carried away by another false hope, and Richard insisting that he needed to investigate any possibility, however small. The next morning, Richard returned to the bridge where Iris and Patty lived. He found the girl sitting on a cardboard box, drawing again with a broken crayon. "You came," she said, smiling for the first time since they met. "Of course I came. You promised to show me where you saw the girls." Iris stood up and began to walk, leading Richard through streets he knew well, but along a path he had never taken. They passed the town market, the central plaza, the school where his daughters studied, until they reached a neighborhood further away from downtown. There, on a quiet street, lined with simple houses, Iris stopped in front of a small park with rusty swings. "It was here," she said. "They were playing on the swing. Sky was pushing summer, and they were laughing a lot." Richard looked around. The park was empty, only a few dry leaves dancing in the wind. "When did this happen?" 3 days ago. They said they missed their mommy and daddy, but that they couldn't come back yet." "Why couldn't they come back?" Iris looked at him with her big, serious eyes. "Because someone won't let them." Iris's words echoed in Richard's mind throughout the week that followed. Someone won't let them. Who could that person be? And why would they prevent his daughters from returning home? He tried to press the girl for more details, but she just shook her head, saying that the girls couldn't explain it properly. That Monday, Richard arrived earlier than usual at the Sterling Yacht Equipment Office, the company he had built from scratch and which was now one of the main suppliers of equipment for boats in the region. But for the first time in years, business seemed secondary. His mind was completely occupied with Iris's revelations. Sharon Miller, his 45-year-old partner, immediately noticed his distraction. Tall and elegant, with auburn hair always impeccably styled, Sharon was responsible for the administrative part of the company, while Richard took care of the technical and commercial areas. "You're different today," she observed, entering his office with a stack of contracts. "Did something happen?" Richard hesitated. Since the twins disappeared, Sharon had been a great support, taking on many extra responsibilities so that he could dedicate himself to the search. But something in the tone of her voice today seemed forced, almost calculated. "I met an interesting child yesterday," he said, watching her reaction. "A girl who says she saw sky and summer." Sharon's face hardened for a fraction of a second before returning to the usual expression of concern. "Richard, you know you need to be careful with these situations. There are many people who take advantage of parents' despair. She's just a 4-year-old child who lives with her grandmother under a bridge." "Exactly. She may be being manipulated by adults." Sharon approached the desk, her perfectly manicured nails drumming nervously on the wood. "Where did this happen?" "On the shore, near the abandoned Mendonca house." Richard didn't miss the flash of recognition that quickly passed through Sharon's eyes. "You know that house?" "Everyone in town knows it," she replied quickly. "It's been abandoned for decades. Why would the girl point to it?" Before Richard could answer, the door opened and David entered the room. His 23-year-old son worked at the company during his business school vacations, but lately he seemed to avoid both his father and any conversation about his missing sisters. "Dad, I need to talk to you about the South Marina contracts," said David, but stopped when he noticed the tension in the air. "Did I interrupt something?" "We were talking about a girl your father met," said Sharon. "One who claims to have seen your sisters." David's face paled visibly. "What girl?" Richard repeated the story, watching both their reactions. David seemed increasingly uncomfortable, fidgeting nervously with the papers he was carrying. "Dad, I think you should be careful," David said finally. "It can be dangerous to get involved with people like that." "Dangerous how?" I don't know. I just think it could be a trap." Sharon nodded emphatically. "David's right. Maybe it's best to inform the authorities and let them investigate." Richard studied the two for a moment. There was something strange about the way they both reacted to the news, an urgency to discourage him that didn't seem to come only from genuine concern. "I'm going to continue talking to the girl," he decided. "If there's a chance, even a small one, that she knows something about sky and summer, I need to investigate." David and Sharon exchanged a quick look that didn't go unnoticed by Richard. That afternoon, he returned to the bridge where Iris lived. He found the girl helping Patty separate recyclable materials, her little hands working with the dedication of an adult. "Iris, can I talk to you again?" The girl stopped what she was doing and smiled. "Sure. Do you want to know more about the girls?" "I want to. You said that someone won't let them come back. Does that someone have a name?" Iris frowned, concentrating. "They don't say the name, but they said it's a woman who knows their daddy. A woman who has hair the color of fire." Richard's heart stopped. Hair the color of fire. Sharon had auburn hair. "Iris, where exactly did you see these girls for the last time?" "I can show you, but it's far from here." Patty, who had been listening to the conversation, approached. "Mr. Sterling, can I ask you a question?" "Sure." "Do you work alone in your company?" "No, I have a partner." "Why?" "It's just that I remember seeing Iris talking to herself a few months ago near a nice car that was parked over there on the corner. When I asked her who she was talking to, she said it was the girls from the boat. At the time, I thought it was just her imagination. But now, what was that car like?" "Silver. Very expensive. It had a woman with red hair driving." Richard felt the ground collapse beneath his feet. Sharon drove a silver car. "Patty, do you remember when this happened?" "Let me see. It was right at the beginning of winter. About 4 months ago." 4 months ago, Sharon had said she was traveling on business to Miami. Richard remembered well because he had called her several times that day, trying to resolve a problem with an important client, but she only returned the calls the next day. "Iris, can you take me to where you saw the girls today?" The girl nodded and began to walk. They crossed downtown, past the port where Richard's company was located, and continued until they reached a more rural area where spaced houses were scattered among native vegetation. Iris stopped in front of an iron gate that gave access to a well-maintained property. The house was modern, with impeccable gardens and a pool that could be seen through the bars. "It was here," she said. "The girls were playing in the backyard. They seemed happy, but when they saw me, they were sad and said they wanted to go home." Richard watched the property. He didn't recognize the place, but there was something familiar in the style of the construction. "Do you know who lives here?" "I don't know, but the woman with the fire hair comes here often." At that moment, the gate opened and a silver car left the property. Richard couldn't see who was driving due to the tinted windows, but his heart leaped as he recognized the model. It was identical to Sharon's. "Iris, let's get out of here," he said quickly, a sense of danger taking over his chest. On the way back, Richard couldn't stop thinking. If Iris was telling the truth, and if she had really seen Sky and Summer on that property, it meant that his daughters were alive. But it also meant that someone was intentionally keeping them away from him. And if the woman with the fire hair was really Sharon, his own partner was involved in the disappearance of his daughters. When he got home that night, he found Margaret in the kitchen, preparing dinner with mechanical movements. She did this every night, cooking for 4 people, even though she knew that only the 2 of them would be at the table. "Margaret, I need to tell you what I found out today." She stopped cutting the vegetables and looked at him. "Does it have to do with that girl?" "It does, and it may have to do with Sharon, too." Richard told her everything: Iris's descriptions, the silver car, the mysterious property. Margaret listened to him in silence, her hands trembling slightly. "You're suggesting that Sharon, that she—" Margaret couldn't finish the sentence. "I don't know what I'm suggesting. I just know I need to investigate more." "What if it's true?" whispered Margaret. "What if our girls are really alive and someone we trust?" "We're going to find out the truth," promised Richard, "no matter what it costs." That night, Richard barely slept. His mind worked incessantly, going over every interaction he had with Sharon in the last 3 years, looking for signs he might have missed. In the morning, he arrived at the office determined to confront his partner. But when he entered her room, he found her on the phone, speaking in a low voice. "Needs to be more careful. We can't take risks now." Sharon noticed his presence and ended the call quickly. "Good morning, Richard. You arrived early today. Who were you talking to?" "Client, problem with the delivery." But her eyes avoided his. "About yesterday. Did you really go look for that girl again?" "I did, and she showed me something interesting." Sharon stiffened. "What?" Richard watched her carefully. "A property where she says she saw my daughters. A beautiful house with well-kept gardens. And you know what's most interesting? She saw a silver car leaving there." Sharon's face paled, but she tried to maintain her composure. "There are many silver cars in the city, Richard." "That's true, but few are driven by women with auburn hair." The silence that followed was deafening. Sharon stared at him for a long moment before forcing a smile. "Richard, I think this obsession is impairing your judgment. Maybe it's time to seek professional help." But Richard had already seen what he needed to see. The fear in Sharon's eyes, the way she avoided his gaze, the haste to change the subject. His partner and friend of years was hiding something about the disappearance of his daughters. The days that followed were a silent torture for Richard. Every conversation with Sharon seemed loaded with subtexts, every look of hers analyzed for signs of guilt or nervousness. He began to question 3 years of partnership, mentally reviewing every important decision, every absence of hers, every coincidence that now seemed suspicious. It was during one of those sleepless nights that Richard decided to investigate on his own. He waited until he was sure Margaret was asleep and quietly left the house, driving to the property that Iris had shown him. It was almost midnight when he parked a few blocks away and walked to the place. The house was dark, but there was a car in the garage, not Sharon's silver one, but a blue sedan that he didn't recognize. Richard watched for almost an hour, looking for any sign of movement, any evidence that his daughters could be inside. It was when he was about to give up that he saw a light turn on in one of the back windows. For a moment, a small silhouette passed by the curtain. Too small to be an adult. Richard's heart pounded. Could it be one of the twins? He approached the fence, trying to get a better view, but the distance and the darkness made it impossible to identify anything for sure. He was considering trying to jump the fence when he heard footsteps approaching on the sidewalk. Richard hid behind a tree and watched a middle-aged man open the gate with a key. The man entered the property, and a few minutes later, the light in the window went out. The next morning, Richard woke up more determined than ever to find out the truth. He arrived at the office before everyone else and went straight to the file where the company's documents were kept. If Sharon was involved in something suspicious, maybe there were traces in the financial records. What he found left him perplexed. In the last 2 years, there were several transactions that he didn't remember authorizing. Transfers to accounts he didn't recognize, payments to suppliers he had never hired. The total amount came to almost $200,000. Did you find what you were looking for? Richard turned around, startled. Sharon was standing at the door of the file room, her cold eyes watching the papers scattered on the table. "These transactions," he said, pointing to the documents, "I don't remember authorizing any of them." Sharon approached, her expression carefully controlled. "These are emergency payments I made when you were unavailable. Remember how you were after the girls disappeared? I needed to make several decisions on my own to keep the company running. $200,000 in decisions that I didn't authorize. Richard, you signed everything. Maybe you don't remember because you were going through a very difficult time, but your signature is on all the documents." Richard examined the papers more closely. There really were signatures that looked like his, but there was something strange about them, small differences that only someone very familiar with his own handwriting could notice. "Sharon, where were you on Tuesday, March 15th, 2022? The question took her by surprise. "What do you mean?" "That was the day the girls disappeared. You said you were in Miami, but I called several times and you only returned the call the next day." Sharon's face hardened. "Richard, that was 3 years ago. Do you expect me to remember specific details? I expect you to remember where you were on the day my daughters disappeared." The silence that followed was tense. Sharon stared at him for a long moment before sighing deeply. "Yes, I was in Miami. I had problems with my cell phone, so I couldn't return your calls immediately. I don't understand why you're questioning this now." At that moment, David appeared at the door of the file room. "Dad, can I talk to you?" Richard noticed how his son avoided looking directly at Sharon, and how she, in turn, seemed to become tense with his presence. "Sure," said Richard. "Sharon, let's continue this conversation later." David waited for Sharon to leave before closing the door. "Dad, I need to tell you something about that girl you met." "What about her?" "I know her. I've seen her before." Richard straightened up in his chair. "Where?" "A few months ago, I was coming back from college when I saw her talking to someone near the marina. It was strange because it seemed like she was talking to herself, but then I realized there were 2 people in the car." "What kind of car?" "A silver car, and one of the people who came out of it." David hesitated, seeming to struggle with himself. "Who was it, David?" "It was Sharon." The world seemed to stop around Richard. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely. She was talking to the girl, gave her something, it looked like money, and then left quickly." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" David lowered his eyes. Because Sharon asked me not to. She said you were already suffering too much, and that it would be better not to complicate things." "What else did she ask you not to tell me?" "Dad, David looked tormented. "There are other things I found out by accident, and that she made me swear I would keep secret." Richard stood up from his chair, feeling a mixture of anger and despair. "David, my daughters have been missing for 3 years. If you know anything that can help find them, you need to tell me now." "She showed me documents," whispered David. "Papers that prove the company was in huge debt that you didn't know about. She said she was trying to solve everything without worrying you, but that she needed time." "What kind of documents?" Bank loans made in the company's name, contracts with abusive interest rates. Dad, if these debts become public, we could lose everything. Richard felt like he was being strangled. And what does that have to do with Sky and Summer? David looked at him with tears in his eyes. I don't know, Dad. I just know that Sharon said that if I told you anything about the financial problems, it could hurt the chances of finding the girls. Did she say why? She said that you might have to sell the house, the company, everything, and that if the girls tried to come back, they wouldn't find us. Richard realized the cruel manipulation behind Sharon's words. She had used David's love for his sisters to ensure his silence about financial irregularities that she herself had created. That afternoon, Richard went to look for Iris again. He found her in the same place as always, playing with colored pebbles she'd collected on the beach. Iris, I need you to tell me exactly what happened when you talked to the woman with the fire hair. The girl looked at him with her big, serious eyes. She gave me money and asked me not to talk to anyone about the girls. But you talked to me, because you're their daddy. She didn't say not to talk to you. Richard smiled despite the situation. Iris's innocence had been his salvation. Did she say anything else? She said the girls were fine, that they were being taken care of, but that they couldn't come home yet because there were bad people who could hurt them. Bad people? Did she say who? No, but she said you were one of those bad people. The shock was like a punch to the stomach. She said I was a bad person. Iris nodded gravely. She said you had done bad things and that, because of that, the girls needed to stay away. But I didn't believe her. Why didn't you believe her? Because the girls talk about you with so much love. They say their daddy is the best person in the world and that they miss you a lot. Richard knelt down in front of Iris, tears burning his eyes. Iris, can you take me to where you saw the girls today? I need to make sure they're okay. I can, but it has to be when it gets dark. During the day, there are too many people watching. Watching what? The house where they are. There's always a man outside, making sure no one goes in. Richard spent the rest of the day planning. If his daughters really were on the property that Iris had shown him, he needed a plan to get them out of there without putting anyone in danger. When night fell, he returned to the agreed location and found Iris waiting for him with Patty. Mr. Sterling, said the elderly woman, I think you need to know something before you go. What is it? Iris told me about the conversation she had with you today, about the woman who said you were a bad person. Patty looked at him intently. I know that tactic. I've seen it before. What do you mean? Many years ago, when I was younger, I saw similar situations. Children being kept away from their families with the excuse that the parents were dangerous. There was usually money involved. Money? People who paid to keep the children, or people who received money to keep them hidden. There was always someone profiting from the family's suffering. Richard felt a chill down his spine. Do you think someone is being paid to keep my daughters away from me? I think the answer is in that house, said Patty. And I think that woman with the fire hair knows exactly what's going on. When they arrived near the property, Richard saw that Iris was right about the surveillance. There was a man sitting in a dark car on the corner, clearly watching who entered and left the street. How are we going to get past him? Whispered Richard. I know another way, said Iris. Through the back. They went around the block and found a small trail that passed behind the houses. From there, they were able to approach the property through an area with denser vegetation. Richard looked through the fence and saw lights on in the house. There was movement in the windows, silhouettes that appeared to be children playing. It was then that he heard something that made his heart stop, a laugh he would recognize anywhere in the world. It was Sky's laugh, his daughter. His girls were really there, alive, just a few feet away from him. But before he could make any move, he felt a strong hand on his shoulder, and a familiar voice said in his ear, I think we better get out of here right now. Richard turned around slowly, his heart pounding, and came face to face with David. His son was pale, his hands trembling, and there were tears running down his cheeks. "Dad, you can't be here," whispered David, looking nervously around. "It's dangerous." "David, my daughters are in there." I heard Sky's voice. "I know," said David, his voice breaking. "Dad, I know everything, and I need to tell you the truth before it's too late." Iris and Patty watched the scene in silence, realizing the gravity of the moment. Richard held his son's shoulders. "Then tell me everything, now." David took a deep breath, as if preparing to rip a bandage off a wound. 3 years ago, the company really was in serious financial trouble, but not because of mismanagement. Sharon had been embezzling money for years, taking out loans in the company's name and using the money for personal investments that went wrong. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because she said that if you found out, you would be desperate and do something reckless that would put Sky and Summer in danger." Richard frowned. "What kind of danger?" "Dad, Sky and Summer weren't kidnapped. They were sold." The world collapsed around Richard. Sold? Sharon was desperate. She owed a lot of money to dangerous people. She found out that there was a couple in Asheville who were willing to pay a huge amount of money for children for adoption. An illegal adoption. Richard felt nausea rising in his throat. And she convinced one of her employees, Joan, who worked in the office cleaning, to help her. Joan had serious financial problems too. She was pregnant and needed money for medical treatment. Sharon offered her an amount she couldn't refuse. "Joan," murmured Richard, the name echoing in his memory. "The woman who cleaned the office. She lured the girls that day at the boardwalk. She knew them because she always saw them when you brought them to work. She said that you had asked her to pick them up, that it was a surprise. Sky and Summer trusted her." Iris approached timidly. "Did you say Joan?" Everyone turned to her. "Do you know that name?" asked Richard. "That was my mommy's name," said Iris, her voice small. "Grandma Patty always told me that Mommy worked taking care of an office before I was born." Patty approached, her face grave. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something I've kept for too long. Joan was my granddaughter. She worked for you in the last months of her pregnancy." The world seemed to spin around Richard. "Your granddaughter. She told me about the proposal she received. She was desperate, sir. The baby had heart problems, needed expensive surgery. The woman with the red hair promised enough money to save the child." "But she died in childbirth," said Iris innocently. "She didn't die, my dear," said Patty, tears in her eyes. "Joan ran away after delivering the girls. She couldn't live with the guilt of what she had done. She left you with me and disappeared. I said she had died because it was easier than the truth." Richard looked at Iris, pieces falling into place in his mind. "So you're daughter of the woman who took your other daughters," completed Patty, "and granddaughter of the woman who always knew where they were. You knew where they were all this time?" Patty nodded, crying. "Joan told me before she left. She said the girls were with a good family in Asheville, people who really wanted to take care of them. But she also said that one day, when Iris grew up and could understand, I should find a way to reunite the family. Why didn't you tell me before?" "Because Sharon threatened me. She said that if I said anything, she would make me lose custody of Iris, that she would put me in jail for complicity." David continued the revelation. "Dad, there's more. The couple who adopted Sky and Summer, they weren't strangers. It was Sharon's brother and his wife. They couldn't have children, and Sharon saw an opportunity to solve two problems at the same time: get rid of her debts and give her brother children." "They're with Sharon's brother?" "They are. And the property that Iris showed you is where they live temporarily. They came to Jersey Shore because Sharon's brother's wife got sick and needs treatment here." Richard looked at the house where his daughters were. So close, but still out of reach. "How did you find out all this?" "By accident. 6 months ago I found documents in Sharon's office. When I confronted her, she told me everything and made me swear to secrecy. She said that if you knew the truth, you would try to recover the girls legally, and that would expose the whole scheme. She said I would be considered an accomplice for having remained silent. But now you're telling me. Because I can't take it anymore, Dad, and because—" David hesitated. "Because yesterday I found out that Sharon is planning to send Sky and Summer far away, abroad. She's afraid you'll find out the truth." The revelation hit Richard like a lightning bolt. "When?" "Tomorrow. They will board for Uruguay with false documents." Richard stood up, fierce determination taking over his chest. "No, that's not going to happen." "Dad, you can't just break into the house. They'll call the police, and without evidence, then we'll get evidence," said Richard. "Patty, you said that Joan told you where the girls were. Do you have any proof of that?" "I have the letters she sent me in the first months after she left. In them, she confesses everything she did and asks for forgiveness." "And I have the documents I found in Sharon's office," added David, "including the payment receipts for Joan." Iris approached Richard and held his hand. "Mister, the girls told me something important." "What was it?" "They know you're not a bad person. And they know you're looking for them. They want to come home." "How do they know that?" "Because they remember you. They remember the house, the mommy who cries, the older brother. They told me many stories about the real family." Patty approached. "Mr. Sterling, there's something Iris hasn't told you yet. She not only sees and talks to your daughters, she can communicate with them for real." "What do you mean?" "The children in the house talk to Iris through the fence. They recognized something familiar in her, the face of the mother who took them away. Sky and Summer knew that Iris was their sister from the first meeting." Richard looked at Iris with new eyes. "You're my daughter's sister." "I am," said Iris, smiling for the first time since they met. "And I came to get you because they asked me to." "They asked me to?" "They asked me to find their daddy and bring him back. They said they're ready to come home." At that moment, a light turned on in the house, and a figure approached the window. It was a little girl who waved discreetly in their direction. "It's Summer," whispered Iris. "She's waiting." Richard made a decision. "Let's go to the front door. If my daughters are in there, and if they want to come home, I'm going to get them." "Dad, what if they call the police?" "Let them call. I have 3 years of police investigation documenting their disappearance. I have proof of Sharon's financial irregularities. And now I have witnesses who can confirm the whole story." They walked to the front of the house. The man who was watching the street was gone, perhaps to have dinner. Richard knocked on the door, his heart beating so hard that it seemed like everyone could hear it. The door opened, and a middle-aged man appeared. He looked at Richard with surprise and then with growing recognition. "You're Richard Sterling," said the man. "I am, and you must be Sharon's brother." The man sighed deeply. "Come in. I think it's time we talked." Inside the house, Richard saw his daughters for the first time in 3 years. Sky and Summer, now 9 years old, were sitting on the couch, watching him with a mixture of joy and confusion. They had grown, but he recognized them immediately. "Daddy?" said Sky, her voice uncertain. "It's me, my daughter," said Richard, kneeling down in front of them. "I came to take you home." The girls ran into his arms, and for the first time in 3 years, Richard hugged his daughters. Tears ran freely down his face as he felt the warmth of the small bodies against his chest. "We missed you so much, Daddy," whispered Summer. "I missed you too. Every day." Sharon's brother approached. "Mr. Sterling, you need to know that we took good care of them. We never mistreated them. My wife and I, we really love these girls as if they were our daughters." "I know," said Richard, surprising himself with the lack of anger in his voice. "I can see that they have been well cared for, but we knew this wasn't right. My wife has been living with the guilt for these 3 years. When we found out that you were investigating, we decided it was time to do the right thing." "Where's your wife?" "At the hospital. Her treatment, it's actually psychiatric treatment. She couldn't live with what we did anymore." That night, the whole truth came to light. Sharon was confronted with the evidence and finally confessed everything. The illegal adoption scheme, the embezzlement, the threats to Patty and David. 6 months later, Richard was sitting in his backyard, watching his 3 daughters play together. Sky and Summer had quickly adapted to returning home, and Iris had integrated into the family as if she had always belonged there. Margaret, who initially had difficulty accepting Iris, now treated her with the same love she dedicated to the twins. The family had expanded but also strengthened. Patty now lived in a small house that Richard had bought for her, close to his. The elderly woman had finally found peace after years, carrying the weight of family secrets. David had graduated and assumed an important position in the company, which was stronger than ever after Sharon's departure and the financial reorganization. And Sharon, she was serving a sentence for kidnapping, forging documents, and embezzlement. But surprisingly, she had found a form of peace in prison, working with other inmates and, for the first time in years, sleeping without nightmares. On that sunny afternoon, as he watched his girls laugh together, Richard realized that life had given him a second chance, not only to recover the daughters he had lost, but to discover a daughter he never knew he had. "Daddy," said Iris, running to him, "the girls want to know if we can go to the beach tomorrow." "Of course we can," replied Richard, kissing the girl's forehead. "We can do anything you want." And for the first time in 3 years, Richard Sterling slept in peace, knowing that his family was complete and safe, that the secrets had been revealed, and that love had conquered all betrayals and lies. Little Iris, who had once been rejected by life, had finally found her place in the world, and 3 sisters that destiny had separated were once again united, ready to create memories that would last forever. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.